Chairman Strickland, it is a great honor for this committee to host a person who used to be a member of this committee back in his heydays, when he was really somebody, when he was in the House.
Sure.
But
It's been a while, but I see, some things never change.
I see that we're getting a bunch of bills from Senate Judiciary right now coming over to this committee, and I think we're getting an idea where we can point our fingers.
Yeah, I think starting today, we're going to be a lot more thorough on the Senate side with our hearings, too. Now I've learned something already just in sitting here. Give me a start.
Absolutely. Okay. Tell us about your bill. We're on LC 412961S.
Good to see everyone, as always. We're on, you already announced the LC number, Senate Bill 105. I'll walk through the bill briefly, and there's a lot of people here that want to speak on this. Back in 2017, for those of y'all that were around then, we had Senate Bill 174 that Senator Kennedy carried on behalf of Governor Deal. They created these behavioral incentive dates for probation termination. The policy was, if you are on a probated sentence, your first offense, you're sentenced for less than a year in jail, you've served 3 years of your time, if you've done everything you're supposed to do, you followed your general conditions of probation, no other offenses, then into your sentence is a behavioral incentive date, your probation gets terminated. Despite us going that direction, there's a couple other areas you'll hear about in the law where probation can be terminated based on similar acts, based on good behavior. Despite that, we know that the data says that there's over 50,000 people in our state right now that qualify to have their probation terminated, yet less than 1,000 people have taken advantage of this. That ends up costing, estimated numbers we had from the budget office in the Senate, we're spending about $34 million a year supervising people that should be off probation. That's the numbers side, but bigger than that, think about the 40-something thousand people in our state that should no longer be on probation by our current law, yet are still answering to a probation officer, still having to tell a landlord, have to tell a boss that they're on probation. And so with Senate Bill 105, what we're doing is we are streamlining the process, clarifying certain parts of the code to make sure that we are actually allowing people that have done everything they're supposed to do to still get off probation the way they should be doing it currently under law. So let me walk through the bill briefly. Mr. Chairman, I know you all are a very thorough committee, not just saying that sarcastically because it's true. And so you probably already read the bill, but I'll briefly go through the sections of it. On the second page, you'll see the current law there dealing with behavioral incentive dates. What we're doing is cleaning up, first off, you'll see starting on lines 35 all the way through lines 42. We're setting a new standard you'll see in a couple other places in this bill for when someone qualifies to have their probation terminated. They paid all their restitution, they have not had a revocation in the last 24 months versus this standard of they generally comply with everything. They have not had probation revoked in the last 24 months, and they have not been arrested for any other non-serious traffic offense during that time. So you'll see we clarify the process that makes you eligible for early termination of probation under behavioral incentive dates. On the next page, you'll see we then streamline the process itself. The way the process currently works is once someone is qualified, the order gets automatically sent to a judge. And if the prosecutor doesn't object within 30 days, that order gets entered. What we've done to make sure that's actually happening is two things in this section. One, you see that the court shall set a hearing within 90 days. If there is an objection, there has to be a hearing on this to make sure this doesn't sit with a court and have that delay in that way. Bigger than that, even in line 55 through 58, you'll see that we're requiring that these behavioral incentive dates are actually put in these people's orders that qualify for this. If it's not put in, as we're seeing we've heard a lot of different reasons why we have those crazy numbers I mentioned of people that ought to be off probation that are not. One of the big things we've seen is a lot of our courts are not putting these dates in sentences when they should. And so it says by law, if there's not one there, it's automatically by law. You still have that behavioral incentive date automatically put in there by law. Getting into the next section of the bill on page 5, this gets into another way that probation can be terminated, and this is the general right of someone to petition for early termination of probation. You'll see in this section, lines 107 through lines 110, we set that similar process where we have a hearing built in if somebody does object to make sure, again, that a judge does rule on those petitions to have probation terminated. Finally, getting to page 7 under section 2, There's also a process in a current law where every 3 years, if somebody is on probation, after every 3 years of that sentence, it's reviewed by the probation officer overseeing their case. And at that point, if the person meets the standard to have their probation terminated, they actually send a recommendation to the court to have someone's probation terminated. And you'll see here, we changed that standard as to what has to be met again on lines 169 to 170 versus this general and special conditions of probation being followed. We're saying that the probation was not revoked in the last 24 months. We're also clarifying, starting on lines 173 on the next page, that if early termination is recommended, then the department shall notify the prosecuting attorney and provide the court with an order causing that termination. And once again, you'll see that we put in here the prosecutor can object within 30 days. If they don't, it automatically gets granted, and the court will hold a hearing within 90 days if there is an objection, so the court can make that decision and it doesn't sit. Finally, you have the last section here starting on line 184. Again, current law, certain qualified offenses where someone is eligible to have early termination of probation. And this again clarifies that process. Instead of saying that someone did not have their probation revoked during such time period, some vague language we have there, we're changing that to be during the last 24 months to make it cleaner as to what we're looking for when someone will qualify. And finally, the last section there, we're putting that same standard of making sure there'll be automatic review of that if there is objection by a court. That's the meat of the bill. I started with the real impact of this. While some of this stuff seems simple, we think that clarifying this process, simplifying this process is going to help, again, these people in our state that have done everything they're supposed to do. They may have made a mistake, but they've proven they're ready to move past a mistake they made in their life and actually help them become more productive members of society. Before I close, I'd like to thank the folks that brought this bill to me. This was not some brilliant idea that I had. The great folks of the Georgia Justice Project brought this idea to me and a couple other senators last year in the off season. They joined with the Faith and Freedom Coalition and came together in a working group, and we're looking for certain things that we, despite all of our criminal justice reform, certain things we still can do in the code to move us forward in those areas. And this is one of the things they brought. And since then, we've had great support from the Metro Chamber, the Georgia Chamber. There's so many different groups. The Reform Alliance that have come out in support of this. So I think some of those folks are going to speak today. But that's the bill, Mr. Chairman. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. And I just want to take a moment of privilege to say that, when I first, now it was 16, 17 years ago, when I first started my career and I was an assistant DA and I was assigned to a judge who became, who's really become one of my great mentors and frankly just one of my dear, dear friends. And Sam Olin's is going to be able to tell him because he's also one of Sam Olin's dear, dear friends. But Steve Schuster, Superior Court judge in Cobb County. And I was a brand new prosecutor. I hadn't even passed the bar yet when I tried my first case in front of him. And as I would negotiate pleas, I would negotiate, 10 years probation or 10 to do 1, 5 to do 1, 5 years probation. And he would, and Judge Schuster hates probation. Like he wants probation to be, he's very much in line with kind of philosophically this. And he would always change the sentences that I negotiated to early terminate probation after 3 years or after 2 years or whatever it may be, if they've complied with everything they're supposed to do. And over time, I began to realize that was a really prudent thing to do because it gave a carrot to a person to do the things that we needed them to do and to behave, and then to give them that incentive. And so as I moved on from his courtroom and was later assigned to Judge Flournoy and later Judge Lark Ingram, I took that kind of philosophy with me and would oftentimes negotiate with the defense lawyer early termination provisions if they complied with everything. I think it is a good policy. It happens a lot right now, as is. I mean, it's something that I think happens all over the state, but there are probably there are judges in places that have no interest in that happening, and so I think that putting this into code and creating this right is a good thing to do. I think that it's interesting in line 169, 170, the difference between being compliant with general and special conditions versus having their probation revoked. That's important because compliance is oftentimes you'll have somebody that's behind on their fines and fees. They just didn't have the money to pay their fees, and so they're technically out of compliance. A lot of times what happens is a probation officer notices them to come in for a compliance hearing in front of the judge, and the judge in a lot of situations will not revoke that probation. They will just say, okay, here's what you need to do, we're going to get you back on track. And so that does not result in a revocation. And having that broader, I just think that allows judges, probation officers, and prosecutors to work on a more individual basis with these folks that are really trying to do the right things. They're taking responsibility and accountability for their actions, and they're trying to comply with probation. They just have circumstances that are making it not tenable. And so I think that's a great change in this as well. So I'm very pleased to see this bill. Representative Saines, did you have a question for the author?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick question on the behavioral incentive day. If it isn't written in the sentence, it's 3 years. Does that shorten what does that create in terms of eligibility by putting that 3 years? Is that just a standard time frame that it would have been in place anyways, or does that shorten or make that day quicker to be eligible?
So it's a good question. That's the existing law, though. So the bill doesn't change that 3-year part. That's in the bill, you'll see. But instead, what we did is streamline the process once someone meets that time period. But that 3 years still remains in the code as it is now.
For like example, if a judge sat on it for 9 months, then they may be off probation by the time, the person could feasibly be off probation by the time the judge got around to being able to reviewing it and signing it. And so I think that tightens that time frame up and requires a swifter action, which I think is a positive thing.
And in fairness, you may be looking at line 57 where we did put that in. That's because you have circumstances where while the law allows for those behavioral incentive dates after 3 years, judges are not putting them in orders. And that's the part where we confirm it has to be put in order, and if it's not, it's assumed by law that it's there. Mm-hmm. So that is an add in there. But the intent is, as the chairman said, is to make sure that we actually meet that 3-year threshold versus waiting for months for a hearing or someone to finally notice, oh, you're eligible. In my private practice, I had a kid whose dad called me about a case, and it turns out in looking at the order, the kid qualified for behavioral incentive day summer a year ago, in summer of 2020. And it was a good example. While had this bill, I don't do hardly any criminal law, it just worked out. I got a call about this and had an Exhibit A. Person qualified for it, but in the summer of 2020, they showed their probation terminated. The kid remains on probation today, and now it's moving with the court, as I said something, and it was never put in the order, and the ball was dropped on it.
One more question.
Please, yes.
All right. I know on a bill that is in your committee that PAC had helped with, there was an add-on that the state had to take it before the judge. It was a requirement of DCS to take it before the judge, so we were sure that upon 10 years it was reviewed. Is that utilized in this? I'm trying to read between the... Is there a reason the state couldn't, upon the time of eligibility, immediately take it to the court for a review, or is it that on most cases it doesn't have to go before the judge because there's no objection and it just gets terminated?
And so if there's not objection, you still need an order signed by the judge completing it. And so I think, and some of these other people after may want to speak more on this, but I think the problem is you have probably however many circuits are in the state, you have probably that many different ways it's maybe being done. I know even in my private practice, mainly a civil practice, every court does things differently with their calendars, every circuit, every judge sometimes. And so there's probably not a clear answer as to how it works in every corner of our state. And hopefully the intent is here to streamline that, to have the same process everywhere, because you still have to get an order to the judge to sign off on this. If the order just sits and the judge doesn't even know it's there based on their process, then nothing's happening at that point.
I think it's a good bill, and I think to add to, the more people we put out of probation or out of community supervision that don't need to, the more time our DCS officers have at monitoring sex offenders and doing things that are of public interest. So thanks for bringing it to the committee.
Great point. Thank you.
Okay, seeing nothing else, I know you're supposed to be somewhere else right now, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hear this testimony, and I will, if there's anything of consequence, then you and I will talk, but we will hear this and hold this today, and we'll bring it back up next week. So
Thank you.
thank you,
Appreciate y'all's
thank
time.
you, Chairman
Thank you.
Strickland.
Thank you.
There are a lot of people that have spoken, that have asked to speak today, and so here's what I want to do. I want to honor that and let everyone that wants to talk do so. I have to be somewhere in 45 minutes, so what I would ask is that everybody please be respectful of that time, and also let's try not to be duplicative of each other, if that makes any sense. And I also want to, you're not signed up to speak, George, but George Ray, I want to thank you in the back there. You have worked for years on this issue and issues like this, and you and I have been working together for you, and I very, very much appreciate your commitment to this and working and getting, a good product. But I'll start with Sam Olens, and again, everybody, remember we're done at 3:00. So, and actually, we're going to be. There's somebody that wants to speak on one of the prior bills, so let's try to have all this testimony wrapped up by 2:50. Thank you, Sam.
Chairman Reeves, thank you. It's a pleasure to follow Senator Strickland for the great work he's doing, and to support the Reform Alliance along with the other members of the group. I'm going to be very short with you. As you know, this is a bipartisan bill. As you know, there are folks from the full political spectrum supporting this initiative. This bill clearly supports the initiative started by Governor Deal and Justice Boggs. The prior bill from 2017 was nice in theory, but it hasn't worked in practice. There are now over 50,000 folks that are eligible to have probation terminated, and only a little bit over 200 have had termination ended since the bid was first started. So this is, as Senator Strickland stated originally, is candidly a streamlined effort to clarify the law and to greatly assist those individuals who have earned the right to have probation ended. And at this time, I will sit down.
Thank you, General Olens. And Sam is a great. He's our former Attorney General. Has offered consistently great testimony for this committee, and it's an honor to call him a personal friend. Skin Edge, why don't you come up here, Skin?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'll be brief. I'm Skin Edge. I'm here today on behalf of Koch Industries, that's K-O-C-H, and Georgia Pacific. And we wanted the committee to know that both Koch and Georgia Pacific support Senate Bill 105, the probation reform bill. These companies support a variety of criminal justice reforms, especially efforts to remove barriers to entry so that individuals who have paid their debt to society and fulfilled any restitution obligations are provided the opportunity to become productive members of society once again. The state of Georgia has been a leader in criminal justice reform. We think this is just yet another step in that march forward. So we appreciate your consideration, your favorable consideration of this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Edge.
Thank you.
Next, I'm going to call Lisa McGraham or McCahan. I can't read the. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Tell me how to say your last name again.
I always say the H is silent, pretend it's not there. McGann.
McGann. Thank you. You're from the Georgia Justice Project,
Yes,
right?
hi.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman Reeves. Thank you for having this committee. This committee hearing. I'm Lisa McGann. I'm the policy director with the Georgia Justice Project, and I'm here with my colleague Rachel Holmes, who is the managing attorney, and she spearheads our early termination probation clinic. I'm going to be really quick as well. I'm just going to summarize why we're so supportive of this bill. It sets clear criteria for what defines good behavior. It creates a uniform court process and court standard, and it eliminates the confusion between the existing pathways, and that's really important. That's why I think we've had so many hurdles with getting early termination in the past. It also, I want to point out, will help tens of thousands of individuals who have proven their rehabilitation by exemplifying good behavior and being law-abiding citizens. It will save taxpayer dollars, and it will finally address the egregious number of individuals who are serving a long probation sentence in Georgia. And I think that's exactly what the reform of 2017 wanted to do. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Adam Pipkin from the Faith and Freedom Coalition. You guys are doing a great job of being brief. Thank you. It's awesome. Keep it up, Adam.
Yes, sir. Members of the committee, Mr. Chairman, my name is Adam Pipkin. I am the Executive Director for Faith and Freedom Coalition of Georgia, and we strongly support this bill. Georgia has more people on probation and parole than any other state in the country. And we would like productive members of society and those that have done all that they've been asked to do to be able to be at home with being good mothers and fathers and being productive members of society. In 2019, 1% of people on probation, only 1% created new offenses, and over 25% of everybody that entered prison was from a technical violation for probation. And so we think there's a lot we can do to limit the amount of people on probation, and this is a good start. So thank y'all.
Tony West from Americans for Prosperity. Hey, Mr. West.
Hey, good to see you all. I'm going to just really duplicate everything I said, so I'll be very, very brief. We support this bill as well. We're for anything that's removing barriers in government policy that keep people from pursuing their American dream. And as everybody's already testified, as Chairman Strickland said, there are heavy barriers that keep people from improving their lives. So thank you for considering this bill, and appreciate the support.
Thank you, Mr. West. Simone Price. And Ms. Price, you testified on, weren't you in Judiciary last week on the citizens arrest bill? Or am I?
I was watching from afar, so I was
You were
not
watching
there,
from
Mr.
afar. Okay,
Mr.
okay.
Chair, no. But it's good to see Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I am with Reform Alliance, and former Attorney General Sam Olens said wonderful things. I just wanted to say briefly that I do think that it's evidenced, and you'll find in some of the information that you have in front of you, that there are diminishing returns to community supervision after a certain amount of time. 18 to 24 months is a really well-documented time period for when it's important to front-load cases, and that if folks are going to commit another crime, they would have committed one within that time frame. The only thing that I haven't heard mentioned that I do think is compelling is that it also increases the criminogenic risk to over-supervise people who are otherwise low risk. So the punitive sentences, lengthy supervision terms, those do not help individuals who would have no reason to reoffend, have no intention to reoffend, but can increase the likelihood that they will reoffend. And we do support this bill and consider it to be one of just radical practicality, regardless of your reform inclination on other issues. So thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in the audience that wants to speak on this bill? Anybody in the committee have any closing comments? We're going to hold this today and bring it back up next week. I do want to say, just for the benefit of the committee too, that this hasn't necessarily been brought up directly, but one of the very important aspects of this bill is how it relates to restitution. Obviously, when people are the victims of a property crime and something is taken or stolen and they don't get that property back, then part of the process is, and part of their probation sentence is, they're ordered to pay restitution that is of the relative fair market value of whatever it is that is lost. And that can be a very frustrating thing, because it happens all the time where they simply don't pay that back. And I believe that further streamlining the incentive to get off of probation will really encourage folks that owe restitution to get that money paid back. And I think that a lot of crime victims, they see that their perpetrator or offender went through the court system, was convicted, and they lost not just a $2,000 computer, but everything that was on that computer, which is a lot more valuable than the computer itself, and things like that. That feel a sense of they didn't get full justice because they didn't really get restitution and it wasn't paid back to them. And some judges will revoke probation for failure to pay restitution. Some judges don't. But I think that by But what's important to know is that this option would not be available to somebody who has yet to fulfill their restitution requirement. And, this is a good policy for Georgians, who are on probation, but it also embeds some protections for those who are also victims. And so I think that that's important.